Kathleen started taking pottery classes. That's where it all began, pottery. The woman who once claimed she couldn't be trusted with anything more delicate than a paper towel roll was suddenly coming home with lopsided bowls and abstract vases she insisted were intentional. I mean, sure, if your intention was to recreate what happens when a toaster meets wet cement, then yes, mission accomplished. At first, I didn't think much of it. We've been married for 7 years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that wives pick up hobbies like magazines at the checkout line. There was the watercolor phase, everything looked like it was crying. The baking phase, everything tasted like it was crying. And let's not forget the 6 weeks of interpretive dance, which I still have minor muscle trauma from watching. But this one felt different. She started dressing like someone who used words like aesthetic in casual conversation. Earth tones, chunky sweaters in 82-degree weather, and an endless parade of rings that clinked like wind chimes when she moved her hands. She claimed it was studio energy. I called it midlife rebranding. Potato. Now, I didn't grow suspicious until the night she brought home a ceramic sculpture that looked suspiciously like a man's torso. And not just any torso. This thing had detail. Veins. Abs. A hint of a smirk sculpted into the belly button area, which I'm 90% sure breaks some kind of clay law. When I asked who her inspiration was, she said, "Oh, just someone from class. You wouldn't know him." And with that, she placed the torso on the mantel, right between our wedding photo and the urn that holds her grandmother's ashes. I don't know if it was the casual "you wouldn't know him" or the fact that the torso had better posture than me, but something clicked. And when something clicks, you either tighten the bolt or pull the thread. I chose the latter. So I started doing what any rational, emotionally mature man with mild anxiety and access to Google would do. I became a detective. Not the suave, trench coat wearing type either. No, I was more the pajama-clad, cereal-eating kind. The kind who watches Dateline and suddenly thinks he's got a sixth sense for betrayal. I wasn't proud, but I was thorough. It wasn't her phone. No, that would have been too easy. Kathleen guarded that thing like it was a fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls. She once took it into the shower in a Ziploc bag. Her explanation? Podcasts. But one evening, I got my first real lead. I was digging through our hall closet, trying to find the tape measure, because apparently, measuring the width of our windows for the 5th time is a productive way to ignore your crumbling sense of trust. When I came across a folder tucked behind a stack of board games. You know the ones. Monopoly, we haven't finished a game since 2016. Scrabble, I refuse to accept Zoatl as a word, and that one jigsaw puzzle missing 3 corners. The folder was plain. Blue. Unlabeled. Innocent, like a vegan muffin. And like a vegan muffin, it turned out to be packed with uncomfortable surprises. Inside were sketches. Dozens of them. Pencil, charcoal, some in ink. All of them different poses of the same man. Reclining, standing, looking over his shoulder like a romance novel cover. And always, with a very specific tattoo on his left shoulder. A spiral. Simple, but striking. Kathleen had always claimed she couldn't draw a stick figure without emotional support. But here was an entire portfolio of professional-level sketching. Either she'd developed secret talent overnight, or she had help. And judging by the number of contour lines drawn with what I'd call excessive fondness, I had a strong guess which it was. I didn't confront her. Not yet. No, that would have required a degree of courage I reserve only for dental procedures and buffet sushi. Instead, I did what every emotionally frazzled husband in suburbia does. I attended the community pottery showcase. The studio was in an old converted firehouse, filled with sculptures, mugs, and whatever the opposite of functional art is. I scanned every table like a dad at a high school dance. Somewhere, I knew, was the spiral tattoo man. And then I saw him. Tall, confident, wearing an apron that said "Clay it ain't so." He stood near a display of ceramic mugs shaped like woodland creatures. He was laughing, deep, charming, too many teeth for a regular mortal. And on his left shoulder, peeking out beneath his tank top, the spiral tattoo. I stared, not in a subtle way, in a full, unblinking, "I've seen this shoulder in my home" kind of way. "Hey," he said, catching my gaze. "You here with someone?" "Yeah," I said, before realizing I didn't know how to finish the sentence. "I mean my wife. Kathleen." His eyebrows raised slightly, but not in surprise. No, this was the look of a man who's been preparing for this moment, and had rehearsed his facial expressions like a courtroom defendant. Kathleen, he repeated, nodding slowly. Yeah, she's really talented. Apparently, I said, trying not to let my voice crack under the weight of my collapsing dignity. She's been sketching a lot lately. Yeah, he said. She mentioned you didn't know about that. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. There are moments in life when the puzzle pieces click into place with such elegant finality that you don't even need the box lid anymore. This was one of those moments. And no, I didn't throw a scene. I didn't flip any clay platters or demand satisfaction with a duel in the parking lot. Instead, I walked over to her display table, took a long look at the ceramic torso centerpiece, now accompanied by a series of smaller matching figures like some deranged nativity set, and nodded. You're expanding, I said. She looked up, surprised to see me there. Jacob, you came. Oh, I wouldn't miss it, I replied, picking up a figure shaped suspiciously like the tattooed man holding a sunflower. I see you found your muse. She blinked, unsure whether to play fool or leap straight into damage control. To her credit, she chose silence. We didn't talk about it on the way home. She rode in the passenger's seat, adjusting the heating vent like it mattered, and I turned on the radio and let some overplayed indie band croon about heartbreak and summer regrets. Back home, she went straight to bed, claiming a migraine. I stayed up, poured myself a glass of ginger ale, and stared at the sculpture she insisted we place on the mantel months ago. That torso, that smug little belly button smirk. I set the glass down, picked up a pen, and scribbled something on a post-it note. Then I stuck it right on the statue's chest, over the heart, where the clay curved inward slightly. Just 3 words. Nice spiral, buddy. And with that, I turned off the lights, walked up to the bedroom, and prepared myself for what would come next. I didn't know what that would be, not yet. But I had a feeling it would involve fewer vases and a lot more questions. The morning after the pottery showcase, Kathleen acted like someone who'd spilled red wine on a white couch and thought silence would erase the stain. She moved around the kitchen with a bit too much efficiency, setting down plates without looking at me, humming some aimless tune like she was in a commercial for oat milk. I sat at the table, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching her set down a spoon like it owed her money. We didn't speak. We chewed and swallowed our breakfast routine like it had been overcooked, and we were both too polite to spit it out. The only sound was the radio playing softly in the background. One of those morning shows where the hosts pretend they're best friends and find everything just hysterical. Kathleen giggled along, out of sync, then cut herself off halfway through a laugh when she caught my eyes on her. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. After she left for studio time, which was now her official excuse for everything from avoiding dinner to skipping out on grocery shopping, I waited 10 minutes. Just long enough for her to get far enough that she wouldn't circle back for a forgotten phone or a bonus goodbye kiss. Then I grabbed my jacket and headed out. It wasn't dramatic. No cinematic montage of me tailing her in a rental car, wearing sunglasses like some underpaid detective. I knew where she'd be. She always signed up for the same Thursday morning studio slot. Clay Culture Studio, 2 blocks from the strip mall that had both a psychic and a vape shop, which seemed like a fair metaphor for this entire situation if I allowed metaphors, which I don't. The studio itself had all the charm of a community center newsletter. Too many plants, too much sunlight, and not a single surface without some glob of dried slip or glazed powder on it. But I wasn't there for the aesthetics. I walked in like I belonged, waved to the kid behind the counter who looked up just long enough to realize I wasn't there to buy a paint-your-own coffee mug experience, and looked away again. The front desk had a clipboard, and that clipboard had a sign-in sheet. Thursdays, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Figure studies with live model. That was the class. That's what Kathleen had been attending for 3 months. The same class, every Thursday. And there it was. Her name, Kathleen Briers. Neat handwriting. A little loop on the K, like she was trying too hard. 3 names above hers was one that didn't surprise me. Miles Wincombe. A name you don't forget when it's attached to a torso sculpture that's been squatting on your fireplace for weeks. I took a picture of the list with my phone. Not because I needed proof. I just liked having a receipt. Back in the car, I sat and stared at the dashboard clock for 5 minutes. I wasn't sure what I expected to feel. Rage? Betrayal? Vindication? I just felt like I needed a snack. Instead, I drove to the local print shop. Small place. Bell on the door. guy behind the counter named Carl, who looked like he'd been working there since ink was invented. I handed him the photo of the sign-in sheet. "Can you blow this up to poster size?" I asked. Carl didn't even blink. "Color or black and white?" I went with black and white. Felt more respectful. The next part took planning. I spent the rest of the day in the garage, dragging out a forgotten sandwich board from when Kathleen tried to launch her eco-friendly dog toy business. It had been a short-lived venture that ended when she realized she was allergic to hemp. I repainted it white, let it dry, and carefully pasted the enlarged sign-in sheet to one side. Then I added a label across the top in thick block letters. "Attendance matters." The next morning, I got up early, before Kathleen's alarm. I loaded the sign into the back of my truck and drove it straight to Clay Culture Studio. I propped it up right outside the entrance, facing the sidewalk where every passing pedestrian could read it. I didn't expect anything to happen immediately, but I knew Kathleen had studio at 9 o'clock, and by 9:05, I was parked across the street, pretending to drink coffee while watching the front door like a guy with nothing better to do. Which, to be fair, was accurate. At 9:17, she stepped outside. Alone. Her arms were crossed, and she had that tight-lipped expression she usually saved for when I forgot to put the trash out. She didn't look around, just stared at the sign like it had personally insulted her soup bowls. She didn't touch it. She didn't move it. She just stood there, and then went back inside. I gave it another 10 minutes, then drove home. That evening, she came through the door without her usual "Hey hon." No clay smudges on her hands. No handmade earrings shaped like abstract fruit. She walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge like the past few hours hadn't happened. "You been out?" she asked, not looking at me. "Yep," I said, sipping water. "Anywhere special?" "Just dropped off a message," I said. Felt like it was time someone started communicating around here. She closed the fridge and leaned against the counter. "You're being dramatic. And you're being careless," I replied, setting down the glass. She didn't argue. That surprised me. I expected deflection. Tears. At least a speech. But she just stood there, eyes drifting to the counter where the mail sat untouched. Then she said, "You embarrassed me." I nodded. "You should have considered that before sculpting another man's abdominal muscles for 12 weeks straight. It's art, Jacob. It's anatomy class with emotional baggage." She looked away. "I didn't sleep with him." I raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "It's the truth." "Well," I said, standing up. "Maybe that's worse." She looked confused. That was new. "What do you mean?" I picked up my keys. If this was just a fling, I could chalk it up to weakness. But this? I gestured vaguely in her direction. This took commitment. Time. Effort. Emotion. You don't sketch someone for 3 months because you think they have nice deltoids. You do it because you're invested. I didn't mean for it to become a thing. But it did. She didn't deny it. I walked to the door, opened it, then paused. "You know what the funny part is?" She didn't answer. "I used to think your pottery looked like nonsense. But now I get it. Every piece you brought home was just your version of a diary. You've been spelling it out for months." I was just too full to read it. I stepped outside. "Where are you going?" she called out. "Anywhere that doesn't have that torso watching me," I said. The door shut behind me. No drama. No yelling. Just air. And that was the first honest breath I'd taken in weeks. By Monday, Kathleen had adopted a strange kind of silence. Not the passive-aggressive kind you get when someone's mad you didn't notice their haircut, but the kind where a person is actively trying to manifest invisibility. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sorry. She was just bland. Like unsalted crackers, standing there folding laundry in the living room, as if the ceramic torso I'd publicly roasted 3 days ago wasn't still sitting 6 feet away on the mantel, silently mocking both of us with its perfectly sculpted ribcage. She had stopped commenting on the news, the weather, the neighbor's lawn decisions, all her usual areas of unsolicited expertise. She simply existed in the house now, like a quiet, artsy roommate who didn't pay rent and refused to take down a shrine to a shirtless stranger. Tuesday morning, a flyer showed up in our mailbox. Clay Culture Annual Spring Showcase, celebrating the spirit of creation. It featured a picture of someone holding a bowl like they'd just discovered hands. Beneath the photo, nominees for the Instructor's Choice Award will be announced Friday. I laughed, loudly and alone. Kathleen came into the kitchen right as I was folding the flyer into a paper airplane and aiming it toward the trash can. She picked it up, unfolded it, and looked at it like it was a confidential government memo. You planning on attending? I asked, finishing my coffee. I might, she said. Eyes still on the page. Let me guess. Miles is being considered for the best use of pectorals in clay category. She didn't answer, which, to me, was a yes. And just like that, Friday became circled on my calendar. Not literally. I don't own a calendar. But if I did, it would have been marked with a red pen and maybe a small doodle of betrayal. Friday evening arrived like an awkward dinner guest. One you didn't invite, but who shows up with a salad and judgment. The Clay Culture Studio had been rearranged for the event. Folding chairs were set up in tight rows. String lights dangled from the ceiling like someone had tried to create ambience using only what was left over from a graduation party. I found a seat near the back, next to an elderly woman crocheting what looked like a sock for a zucchini. She offered me a Werther's original and told me she wasn't there for the art, just the gossip. We got along immediately. Kathleen sat in the front row. Miles sat next to her. Close. Very close. I counted 4 separate points of casual contact, including a knee bump and a shared whisper that made her tilt her head the way she only used to do when trying to figure out if I'd used real lemon juice or the bottle kind. A woman in a floral blouse took the mic. Welcome, everyone. What an incredible journey we've had this season, filled with creativity, self-discovery, and the transformative power of clay. I resisted the urge to clap, not because I wasn't supportive, but because I feared that if I started, it might be sarcastic enough to echo. Then she got to the awards. Instructor's Choice, People's Favorite, Technical Excellence. It was like a low-stakes Oscars where everyone smelled vaguely like kiln dust and ambition. When she announced Miles as the winner of the Instructor's Choice Award for his piece titled Tension, the room burst into applause. Kathleen clapped harder than anyone else. I swear I saw her mouth the word brilliant. The piece was unveiled at the front of the room. A large sculpture of 2 figures, back to back, reaching in opposite directions. Abstract, subtle, and, of course, the male figure had the same spiral tattoo on the left shoulder. Because subtlety is for cowards. After the applause died down, they opened the floor for comments. Not questions, comments. Because nothing spices up community art night like unsolicited opinions from strangers in sensible shoes. A man in a windbreaker praised the symmetry. Someone else referenced ancient Greek motifs. Then, as if summoned by fate or boredom, I raised my hand. The floral woman next to me whispered, "Oh, this should be good." "Hi," I said, standing up. "I'm Jacob. I'm not an artist. I can't sculpt anything unless it comes in a tube of caulk and is attached to a bathroom tile. But I just wanted to say how enlightening this experience has been." Miles smiled politely. Kathleen froze. "I've learned that clay isn't just about form. It's about feelings. Long, drawn-out, complicated feelings. Feelings that you maybe should have talked about before they turned into, I don't know, life-size symbols of romantic misdirection." A few people chuckled. The floral woman patted my elbow. "Anyway," I continued, "I especially love the symbolism and tension. 2 people, pulling apart but still connected. Powerful stuff. Definitely doesn't look like it was modeled after someone you met in a room filled with spinning wheels and false promises." The studio leader cleared her throat. "Thank you, Jacob. Always nice to hear from supporters." "Always," I agreed and sat down. When the showcase ended, people began filing out. Kathleen walked toward me, jaw set like she was preparing to enter a courtroom. "Really?" she said, not even waiting until we got outside. "What? I thought we were all celebrating artistic expression." "You embarrassed me." "Again?" I shrugged. "You nominated yourself for that one." She looked genuinely offended, which I found impressive. "Jacob," she said, lowering her voice, "not everything is about you." "You're right," I said. "Some of it is apparently about Miles." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Good choice." Back home, the silence returned. But this time, it was thicker, less peaceful, more intentional. She went to bed early. I stayed up and rearranged the mantel. I moved the torso sculpture, put it in the guest room closet. I replaced it with a photo of us from a vacation 3 years ago. She was smiling. I looked like I'd just figured out how to smile. We both looked about 3 years more honest. Then I sat on the couch and opened my laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for. Not a divorce lawyer. Not yet. But maybe something more productive than sarcasm and emotional ping pong. And that's when I remembered the studio newsletter I saw earlier that week, sitting unread in my inbox. The next class offering? Sculpting with Truth, an honest approach to form. Perfect. By the following Tuesday, it was clear we were in what the movies would call a Cold War, except less nuclear tension and more passive reallocation of throw pillows. Kathleen had moved 2 of them from the couch to the guest bed, like she was slowly evacuating her presence from shared spaces 1 cushion at a time. I responded by taking back control of the garage radio, which had been stuck on her favorite smooth jazz station since March. We were coexisting like co-workers who once dated, shared a printer, and now carefully pretended the other didn't exist in the break room. That night, Kathleen stood by the bookshelf, rearranging our non-functioning collection of cookbooks. She hadn't opened one in years, but tonight she was deeply concerned with the alphabetical integrity of titles like Herbs of the Midwest and 30-Minute Miracle Meals. I didn't interrupt. I was scrolling through the community center's bulletin board online, which, as I discovered, had everything from scrap metal pickup schedules to senior belly dance classes. What caught my eye, though, was a flyer for a weekly speaker series. Every Wednesday evening. Free. Open to all. The upcoming one was called Creative Accountability: How to Recognize Emotional Projection in Artistic Collaboration. The irony practically screamed through the screen. I signed up. Not out of spite. Not completely, anyway. When I arrived, the room was exactly what you'd expect from a community rec center pretending to be a lecture hall. The chairs were uncomfortable, the lighting was too sincere, and the whiteboard at the front looked like it had survived a failed team-building seminar. A man with a lanyard greeted me with more enthusiasm than necessary. He handed me a name tag and a program sheet printed in grayscale to save on ink. There were about 15 of us. A couple of tired-looking retirees, one guy wearing socks with sandals and typing aggressively into a tablet, and a woman knitting something red and unreadable. I felt right at home. The speaker, a woman named Danielle, started off strong by reading a quote she said came from a documentary on ceramic artists, but which sounded suspiciously like something from a coffee shop napkin. The hands reveal what the mouth conceals. Deep. She launched into a presentation about how creative people often misplace their emotional weight onto their projects and collaborators. She had a slide for everything. Charts. Arrows. One graph showed emotional leakage zones with alarming specificity. I took a photo of that one. Could be useful. Then came the participation portion. We were asked to pair up and share an experience of emotional distortion in group creative work. My partner was a man named Vernon who smelled like dry leaves and claimed he was writing a one-man musical about the history of light bulbs. Vernon went first. He told a long story about how his co-writer once changed a lyric without telling him, which led to a meltdown involving a ukulele and a misprinted poster. I nodded sympathetically. Then it was my turn. I'm not in a band or a theater group, I began, but I've recently become part of a sculpting trio. Unofficially. The third member doesn't know he's in it, but he has great upper body definition and a signature spiral tattoo. Vernon blinked. I continued. The first member is my wife. She's discovered ceramics. Specifically, ceramics featuring the anatomy of someone who isn't me. It's been an enlightening journey of texture, glaze, and betrayal. Vernon slowly put his notebook away. Probably a smart move. After the session ended, I hung back. Not for deep reflection or to ask follow-up questions. I just wanted to see the community bulletin board in person. It was even better than the digital version. Flyers for yoga, lost umbrellas, a Jazz Your Taxes workshop, and there it was, a glossy poster for the upcoming Clay Culture Workshop series. And right below it, another flyer. Miles, in a white turtleneck, staring wistfully at a mug he was holding like it contained the secrets of the universe. Private sessions now available. Figure, form, flow. Limited spaces. I stared at the poster for a long minute. Then, on a whim, I peeled it down. Not all the way. Just enough to slip in a printed note I had saved in my wallet from earlier that week. Looking for accountability? Try telling the truth to the people you share your tools with. I tucked it behind the flyer and smoothed the poster back into place. Then I went home. Kathleen was sitting on the couch, laptop open, watching a tutorial on advanced glazing techniques. The volume was low, but the narrator's voice had that slow, deliberate cadence that made every word sound like a therapy session. How was your night? She asked without looking up. Educational, I said, kicking off my shoes. I learned about leakage. She blinked once, then went back to her screen. I sat across from her. Not too close. Not too far. You know, I said, there's this guy offering private sessions at the studio. Figure stuff. Form. Flow. I saw his flyer. Her hands paused over the keyboard. That's something you're considering? I already sculpted him, she said, finally looking at me. Sure, I nodded. But maybe he has more angles left. She closed the laptop slowly. Is this your version of an interrogation? No, I said. If it were, there'd be overhead lighting and a two-way mirror. This is just me asking if you're planning to keep using our marriage as a workspace. Her expression stayed flat, but her foot started tapping. A classic sign of Kathleen processing. Or preparing a speech. I waited. I didn't think it would bother you this much, she said finally. That's either very naive or very confident of you. You never showed much interest in what I was doing. You never sculpted me with that level of enthusiasm. She didn't argue. She just stood, walked into the kitchen, and poured herself a glass of water like the conversation had physically dried her out. I stayed on the couch. Not to brood. I wasn't in the mood for brooding. I just didn't want to move yet. You know, I called out. I signed up for a workshop next week. Sculpting with truth. No miles. No torsos. She leaned on the counter, sipping. You're going to make something? No, I said. I'm going to watch. And see what it feels like to sit in a room full of people making something honest. She nodded once, then disappeared down the hall. That night, I pulled out a notebook. Not to write poetry or draw feelings. I just made a list. Questions I wanted answered. Not from her. From myself. One of them was, what happens when someone stops being your person but keeps being your roommate? The others were more practical. Like whether the guest room could be rearranged without needing professional mediation. It started with the garage. Not an emotional breakthrough or a meaningful conversation, just the garage. One Saturday morning, I walked out there with the intention of finding the small electric screwdriver I hadn't seen since the last time I tried to fix the mailbox, and ended up rewiring the sprinkler timer instead. The screwdriver never turned up. What I did find was an unopened box labeled Kathleen Miscellaneous Studio Supplies, tucked behind our unused tandem bicycle. A short-lived compromise from our second anniversary. I knew better than to open it. Curiosity, after all, had already introduced me to clay anatomy and spiral tattoos. But something about the box sitting there, still sealed, like it had been waiting for the right day to become a symbol, annoyed me. So I sat down on the old folding chair, the one with the bent leg, and just stared at it. That's when I had the idea. Our neighborhood association, in all its enthusiastic mediocrity, was organizing the annual spring yard sale weekend. A sacred tradition where everyone dragged out their dust-covered regrets and tried to convince each other they were worth $3. I never participated, but this year felt suitable. I pulled out my phone and logged into the association's website, which hadn't been updated since someone tried to start a neighborhood chess club in 2018 and quit after 2 weeks. I clicked the big green button that said Apply to Sell and filled out the form. Name, Jacob Brenner. Address, same as always. Items for sale, ceramics, select memories, minor delusions. When I hit submit, I half expected a confirmation email to arrive with sirens and a pop-up asking me if I was emotionally stable enough to proceed. Instead, I got an automated reply. Thank you for registering. A sign will be delivered to your lawn the Friday before the sale. Perfect. I didn't say a word to Kathleen. She would find out soon enough. Yard sale weekend had a reputation for drawing out everyone's nosiest instincts and half of the city's hobby flippers. And I had a very specific table in mind. Over the next few days, I began selecting the inventory. Not out of bitterness. No, this was more of a creative experiment. I stacked a few of the infamous clay pieces on a folding card table. Not just the torso. Oh no, that one got a special pedestal. A repurposed milk crate with a velvet cloth I borrowed from the Christmas decorations bin. I added the matching minifigures, the exaggerated mugs, a flat dish with the word Explore carved into it like it was giving me passive-aggressive life advice. Each item got its own index card with a label. Untitled but clearly confused, $2. Emotional Spill, glazed, $5. You Wouldn't Know Him, limited edition, $3.50. I didn't price anything above $5. I wasn't greedy. By Friday morning, the association delivered the official yard sale participant sign to our lawn. Kathleen saw it when she came back from wherever she now went during the mornings. She stared at it like it had personally accused her of tax fraud. "We're doing the sale now?" she asked, standing in the doorway. "I am," I said, not looking up from my folding table layout draft. "You've already donated enough." She blinked, either unsure if she was being insulted or just tired from whatever interpretive glazing class she'd come from. "You're selling the art?" I nodded. "I think it's time we shared your vision with the public. Let the people decide." She walked into the garage. When she saw the table, she went quiet. The kind of quiet that meant she was internally rewriting several conversations at once. "You labeled these." "Of course. Art needs context. You can't sell these." "I can. I already signed the form. It's official. The community expects it now. They're mine." "Well, they were made during our marriage, on our property, using shared utilities. I think that makes them community property. Besides, I'm pricing them modestly. I'm not profiting. I'm curating." She looked like she wanted to argue, but couldn't quite figure out what angle wouldn't make her sound like a sculptor having a custody dispute with a mildly sarcastic municipal worker. "You're being petty. I prefer the term domestically resourceful." She walked out without slamming the door. A small victory. Saturday arrived, and with it came the yard sale circus. Folding tables bloomed across driveways. Retirees wandered through like seasoned antique pickers. Kids sold lemonade that tasted like regret. Someone 2 houses down tried to sell a treadmill with a missing belt and a vision board. My table was a hit. Not because people liked the ceramics. No, most of them squinted, held the pieces at arm's length, and asked if I had made them. I always replied, "No, but I did contribute to the emotional inspiration." That usually ended the conversation. One woman offered me $20 for the torso, said it would make a great plant stand if she turned it upside down. I told her she'd need to sign a waiver in case it emotionally damaged her ficus. She paid in cash. Kathleen didn't come outside all morning. Around noon, I saw the curtain twitch. By 1 p.m., I'd sold almost everything. I only had 2 items left. One was a cup with an uneven handle and the words "Hold Gently" etched into it. The other was a small sculpture of 2 hands, fingers barely touching, which I labeled "Joint Venture," now dissolved. A young couple bought both for their new apartment. Said they liked the rawness. I didn't ask follow-up questions. By 2 p.m., I packed up the table and folded the sign. Inside, Kathleen was in the kitchen, rearranging a drawer full of measuring spoons. "You sold them," she said. "Almost all." One woman said she wanted to put succulents in the abs. "You're mocking something important to me." "No," I said, pouring myself a glass of water. "I'm recycling." "Thought you were into sustainability." "You turned my art into a punchline." It was already halfway there. I just gave it a laugh track. She didn't say anything for a while. Just opened and closed drawers like she was preparing for a drawer-themed escape room. Then she asked, "What's the point of all this?" "You moved out emotionally 3 months ago," I said. "I'm just clearing the leftovers." "You think this is funny?" "No," I said, "but it's easier than sitting in silence while we pretend none of this happened." She sat at the table. "You're done then?" "With ceramics?" "Absolutely. With us." I looked at her for a long moment. Not dramatic, just observant. "I'm considering it." She nodded. "Once." And then she went back to sorting the measuring spoons. We didn't talk about the yard sale again. Not even when Kathleen walked into the garage the next morning and saw the empty card table where her torso sculpture used to reign like a shirtless dictator. She didn't mention the missing crates. She didn't ask who took what, or what ridiculous nicknames I'd given to her projects. She just stood there for a moment, like she was trying to calculate the price of dignity per pound, then went back inside and pretended nothing had ever been made. That was our new rhythm, mutual ignoring with the occasional brush against shared history. It was less dramatic than you'd expect. No shouting, no doors slammed, no late night, "we need to talk" sessions. Just quiet acknowledgement that we were 2 people slowly dividing a life like it was a set of IKEA furniture. 1 Allen wrench, 2 mismatched expectations, no instructions. That Tuesday, I started the final inventory. It wasn't legal or financial. I wasn't scanning serial numbers or looking at bank accounts. I was going room by room, mentally dividing objects into categories: mine, hers, pointless, and items too emotionally confused to categorize. For example, the dented metal lamp in the study, mine. The throw blanket she insisted was Scandinavian woven, but felt like drywall. Hers. The decorative hourglass we both forgot to turn for 3 years. Pointless. The wedding photo where I looked like I was squinting into a future I didn't fully understand. Emotionally confused. I didn't tell her I was doing this. Not because I was hiding it. Mostly because announcing it felt like giving a TED Talk titled, How to Emotionally Pack Without Boxes. Instead, I just quietly moved through the house with a sticky notepad and a pencil, marking things with a barely visible code. I didn't even need to write full words. Just shapes. A triangle meant I was taking it. A square meant she could have it. A circle meant the thrift store could inherit it and wonder what poor decisions led to its creation. The sticky note on the ceramic wall piece that said, Grow through what you go through, received a very enthusiastic circle. Around the same time, she stopped attending the studio classes. I didn't ask why. Maybe she lost the will to sculpt things that wouldn't survive the next sidewalk sale. Or maybe the Miles chapter had ended, and she hadn't figured out what genre to follow it with. Either way, the art supplies started collecting dust on the shelves. The apron hung by the door like a retiree who'd finally accepted it was never going to be called back for one last job. Then came the spreadsheet. Kathleen loved spreadsheets. To her, nothing brought order to chaos like rows and columns with drop-down menus. One night, while I was in the living room rotating the furniture out of spite and curiosity, she walked in holding a tablet like it was a contract for peace talks. I made a list, she said. Is it color-coded? Yes. Then I'm listening. She sat across from me, swiped through tabs with the poise of someone who once created a vacation budget broken down by snack category. I thought it might be easier if we just worked through the logistics of separating everything, of finishing whatever this is. This, I said, has been a group project with terrible time management. She turned the screen toward me. Sure enough, there were tabs labeled furniture, appliances, books, and my personal favorite, questionable items. I clicked that one first. It included a snow globe from our trip to Santa Fe, where we got in an argument about street parking, a wind-up clock shaped like a cat that she bought because it had character, and I hated because it ticked like it had a personal vendetta, the mug from our first date, which we had both silently ignored for the past 6 months, but still moved when cleaning. What's the protocol for splitting emotional artifacts? I asked, tapping the cat clock entry. I figured we could vote. Or just agree neither of us wants them. Democracy by disinterest. Works for me. We spent the next hour reviewing the list. No lawyers. No formal proceedings. Just 2 people clicking yes or no on things they used to argue over. The blender she never used but refused to donate? Mine now. The bookshelf we built together but that only holds her books about urban gardening and self-actualization? Hers. It was the calmest we'd been in months. The strange efficiency of detachment. It wasn't sad exactly. More like getting a refund for a class you stopped attending halfway through. Then she paused. Tapped the screen. There's one more tab. I waited. It's just labeled US. I didn't look. I didn't ask what was in it. Instead, I said, if you've put our relationship into a spreadsheet, I'm going to need a drink before we review the formula. She almost smiled. We didn't open it. That was the agreement. That was enough. That weekend, she packed a few boxes. Just the basics. Clothes, books, the terrible throw blanket. I helped her carry them out to her car. Not out of obligation, but because watching her do it alone felt like volunteering for another sculpture showcase without snacks. She didn't cry. I didn't either. We weren't those people. Crying would have required one of us to say something vulnerable, and we had long since replaced that function with mild sarcasm and delegation. Before she left, she stood by the car, one hand on the door, and said, Do you want me to take the hourglass? I looked at it, still perched on the shelf, stuck it half full since 2021. Nah, I said. Let it keep guessing. She nodded, and then she drove off. Quietly. No music, no farewell wave. Just the gentle retreat of someone who once sculpted abs for a man who wasn't her husband, and then eventually stopped explaining why. I walked back inside. The house didn't feel empty. It felt undecorated, like someone had moved out of a life, not a place. I sat down at the table, picked up the final sticky note I hadn't placed yet, and stuck it to the laptop screen. It was a square, but I wrote one word next to it, Start. Then I opened a new tab. No spreadsheets, just a blank page. To begin again. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel